Hi, and welcome to the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. I'm Dupe Witherick, alcohol free wellbeing and transformational coach, and the best selling author of A Cocktail of Clarity, How to Ditch Drinking, Embody a Joyful New Identity, and Thrive Alcohol Free. This podcast will show you that being alcohol-free is not what the traditional narrative says. And even though alcohol is so ingrained in our society that it is okay to give yourself permission to stop drinking if you want to. And you do not have to wait until you hit rock bottom. It is certainly not boring, and I believe ditching drinking is just the start to living an extraordinary life. By getting rid of this one thing, it allows the doors to open to endless possibilities and opportunities. Each week, we will have guests on who are at various stages of the alcohol-free journey, from those who are curious to those who have been alcohol-free for years. We will also have experts on talking about different topics relating to alcohol and beyond. Through these conversations, you will discover what it means to thrive alcohol-free. Enjoy. Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. I am so pleased you're here and thank you for listening. And if you are new or you've recently started listening to the podcast, there are so many episodes you can go back to. We've had some incredible guests on here and there are more to come. But I just thought I'd offer that to you. Go and listen to some of the previous episodes. And if you like the podcast, please subscribe, share, and review, because that helps other people find it, other people who might need or be looking for this podcast to find it. So I appreciate that in advance. And if you have any feedback, if you'd like to see any guests or hear any guests on the podcast, feel free to reach out at Thrive Alcohol Free on Instagram, and I'd love to connect. Okay, so today's guest is Anne Skriba, and Anne is a 5-time certified alcohol-free empowerment coach. She's the founder of Clean Play Coaching, and she's a former D2, D3 college athlete and basketball coach. And she's also the co-host of the Clean Play podcast with Chris Marshall. So we had a really good conversation. We talked about her journey, and we talked a lot about identity actually, and how to shift identity and what that means and the impact that has. And we talked about dreaming again, external validation. It was a really great episode. So without further ado, here is the episode with Anne. So welcome, Anne. Thank you so much for being on the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. How are you today?
Hey, Duve, I'm good. I'm doing well. Yeah, things are going well, feeling good. Like I said earlier off camera, I am beckoning fall into Florida. I don't know how that's going, but that's what I'm trying to do. But no, overall things are good, and I'm really excited to be on the show.
Yeah. Autumn is definitely one of my favorite seasons as well. I know we talked about it. I think it's just, I love obviously in the UK we have the change of leaves, and you
Yeah.
just have that whole sense of back to school feeling,
Yep.
that reset, and it's lots of fun. So definitely like that season as well. Okay, so for those people who might not know you, why don't we start with just a bit of an introduction? Who
Yeah.
are you and what brings you to the podcast?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, my name is Anne Skriba, and I am a alcohol-free empowerment coach. Just recently got my certification finished up, and so starting to work with clients, helping people, with everything from, considering or reconsidering their relationship with alcohol. Also, just helping people through life transitions, identity shifts, things like that. But beyond that, I am a former athlete. I was a athlete my entire life. I don't know. I don't know if you ever really lose that identity. You just no longer play competitively. So I would say it like that. And so grew up loving basketball, played college basketball, coached in college. And then, made a transition after I was done coaching and playing. But yeah, I am just somebody who's trying to make the most of the time that I have, and have had a lot of changes in the last couple of years of the trajectory of life. But I live in Florida. I have a wonderful partner, and that's kind of my background.
Amazing, amazing. Well, thank you for that. And
Hmm.
so there's quite a bit there. Former athlete, and
Yeah,
absolutely, I think you're always an athlete, aren't you? It's like,
yeah,
people say you're always a runner, even if you're not running every day or every other day, whatever it is, you're still a runner. That's your identity, if that's what is good for you. So yes, identity is always key. I always think about alcohol as well, the
right.
identities we give ourselves.
Yeah,
So again, what is your identity? What label are you putting on yourselves that you maybe don't have to put on yourselves versus, what are the good identities you
right.
want to be, and who do you want to become? But okay, so why don't we maybe start with what brought you to become alcohol free? You're obviously an alcohol free empowerment coach, and we'll get on to
Yeah,
that a bit later. But it'd be great
yeah.
to hear what actually led you down this path.
Yeah, it's one that I never thought I would actually take. And I never like had the express intention of getting sober. It was kind of like a side effect, if you will, of kind of the trajectory that I took. But I grew up I know you're in the UK, but I grew up in the Midwest in the States, in Wisconsin. And so my entire life, growing up, in the 90s, alcohol was everywhere. It was at every family event, every occasion. We're big. My family was a big, sports fan. So every Packer game, Green Bay Packers, it just surrounded all of us. And I think, I had my first drink when I was like young, maybe like a young toddler. And I think an uncle of mine said, "Oh, you can have a sip of this beer." And at that time, it was cute, it was funny. No one really questioned it. And so I saw alcohol growing up my entire life. And when I got into middle school and high school, that's when you kind of wanted to be rebellious in some way. And so I kind of found myself at a place where I was pursuing, being a college athlete while also kind of on this other side, kind of this double-sided, edge of the sword, was drinking, experimenting with drugs, but also doing it in a way that was very secretive because I needed to maintain this, I won't say facade because it wasn't, but I also needed to maintain this veneer of being the star athlete and a good student. But then alcohol was always this thing on the side. And so, like I said, it also had a hold in a lot of different places in my family. I had a lot of people in my family who struggled with alcohol in one way or another. And whether I knew it or not, because of that, it really, created in me, before I even had language for it, this idea of functionality as a drinker. We hear about gray area drinkers, binge drinkers, and then you hear about a lot of people who kind of quote can handle it, even though it might take them a lot longer to realize how much alcohol is actually impacting them. So all throughout high school and then into college, I was drinking a lot, but I also was able to kind of maintain my responsibilities and work out and play. And then when I got older, I was able to coach and I was able to do all these things. And so it was always very much a part of every day. And I would say after I got done playing and after I got done coaching is when it really became not just this, happy hour thing that I would do or something like that. It was every day, essentially morning until night. And it just became more and more of something I needed to turn to kind of deal with the emotions and difficulties of everyday life. And so, how I kind of went on this trajectory to even consider being alcohol free is I really found myself at a very low point in terms of just, you know, who I was. I went from being a college basketball coach and I moved and got, a job, a regular job. I was working from home. And so that identity shift was really hard for me to figure out how to handle. And so I kept drinking more and more to be able to kind of, you know, absolve myself from a lot of the feelings of guilt and shame and regret and loss. And so then I came to a point where people in my life really implored me to pursue help in the form of therapy. And so I walked into therapy not thinking anything about alcohol, just thinking that I needed help. And that was kind of the start to even thinking about, you know, what is the role that alcohol is playing in my life.
Hmm. Yeah. And it's so common, isn't it, that people use alcohol to numb, especially when you're going
Yeah.
through a challenging time. I think that identity shift piece is really quite key. What you talked about there with,
Yeah.
you've been a player, a coach in basketball. That had been your identity, that
Yeah.
had been your life. And then all of a sudden, it's gone.
Yep.
And then what? And who are you? And what does that mean? And if you hold a lot of weight in terms of what that was for you, it is tricky to extract the two, isn't it? And forget who you are innately, who you are at your core. Because ultimately, whatever label we put on ourselves, whatever identity, that isn't
Yeah.
us, right?
Right.
We are whoever we are, just as we are. It doesn't matter whether we're a teacher, a basketball coach, an executive director, whatever. It's at the core, we are just, we are, I am. And I think that's a real challenge because a lot of people hold on so tightly to these identities that when the rug's taken out under them and they don't, or it's something that they didn't plan for, or they had dreams that it didn't quite transpire in the way that they were hoping, then it's like, oh, right, what next? And that's really, where change and going through that change curve and all of that and re-evaluating and becoming this new identity is a struggle. And when you have to, no one wants to sit in those emotions and that uncomfortableness. So of course, alcohol's an easy thing to turn to. So when you got to therapy and you thought, okay, I'm just here to talk about the fact I need some help, but obviously it wasn't alcohol. So
Right.
tell me what happened next.
Yeah, it's great. So I mean, therapy really opened up a lot of the doors because what I didn't realize, apart from the drinking, and I was numbing a lot through drinking, I just didn't really have a lot of permission or access to emotions in general. And so, like I said, it took a lot, and it obviously took a lot of drinking and some of the behaviors I was exhibiting for my friends and family to even think that anything was wrong, because I always was the one that was who people would turn to. I was the one that people would come to when they needed, motivation, or they needed a pep talk, coach, give me some inspiration to get through whatever they're going through. And so when I found myself at a position not only to not have anything for the people in my life, but for them to be concerned, it really was alarming to myself and the people in my life. And so what therapy, initially allowed me to do was to realize that I no longer had to also hold on to that identity of having it all together. I didn't have to be the strong one anymore. And there's layers to that. As being an athlete, you want to be mentally tough, you want to get through stuff, but there's also layers to that as a Black woman of like, I don't need anybody's help, like I can handle it, and things like that. And so we started to peel back some of those layers together. And, like I said, certain family members of mine also had interesting relationships with alcohol that impacted me. And so that was kind of the door of like starting to talk about the way that certain family members struggle with alcohol impacted me, and how I internalized that as I'm going to be functional, I'm going to be able to handle, quote unquote, drinking. And so that kind of also led into actually starting to ask questions about like, what is it about my relationship with alcohol, and why is it that I'm turning to it at such a high rate? And my therapist, it took months. It was probably like an 8-month process from the time that I started therapy to even considering being alcohol free in any way. But it was a lot of processing of the emotions. It was a lot of recognizing trauma that I had experienced. And then it was just starting to get curious. Like I think the non-judgmental approach that she had, the curiosity, also obviously coupled with her care, she just said like, what would it look like for you to just at least get an idea of how much you're drinking? Because I knew I was drinking a lot, but we also never tracked it. And so she was like, as non-judgmentally as you can, just so I can kind of gauge like, how much are you drinking? And so we can kind of have a baseline. And so she asked if I would do that for a week, and I was like, you don't want that. I'm telling you, you don't want to know those numbers. But there was something in me that was also curious, and so we did that. And came back, and it was not the presenting of the number to her that was hard. It was the sitting with the raw data for me that was
Mhm.
hard. And so then we slowly started to talk about what it might look like to drink less or not at all. I read Holly Whitaker's book, Quit Like a Woman. She recommended that, which was really, really helpful in understanding the systemic nature of alcohol and how it's pushed on us, and especially for women, how much, damage it's causing, globally. And so that kind of rebellious side again of like, oh, to not drink is is actually non-uniformity. Everybody's doing this. So to not drink, there has to be something different about people who choose to not do that. And so I've read the entire book at a bar, not in one day, but every time I read it, I was out drinking, and it kind of became this its own like harm reduction method without me even knowing it. Because I'd read a little bit, go back up to the bar, read a little bit, and be like, I should go back up and get another drink if I'm going to keep reading it. So that was that. And then, from there, after I read that book, I felt like, okay, I could at least give this a shot. And we started, she was like, how many days have you gone consecutively without drinking? I was like, I don't know, 2. She's like, okay, let's start with 2. And, the athlete in me, the, overachiever in me was like, well, I don't meet with her next for 4 days, so I'll try 4. And so I did 4, and then we met that day, and she's like, I'm glad you didn't like need the detox or anything like that. She's like, we gotta make sure you're safe and all that. But that was over 1,000 days ago. So it started with 2, and we're still going now. But it was just this willingness to consider that something could be different.
Gosh, congratulations on a
Thank
thousand
you.
days. And I talk a lot about small steps, and it doesn't need to be forever. And I wonder, when you started with those 4 days, did you expect to ever get to 1,000 over a thousand
No.
days?
No, like, it just became, this thing where every day I was just able to kind of make it through. And like I said, I never even thought I was going to be sober. So to be, here 1,000 days plus later, it's yeah. But yeah, forever was never the intention. It was just a constant evaluation each day of like, how do I feel? How is this affecting me? And there was a lot of positives. It wasn't easy by any means. We know that getting sober is not like an easy thing, but overall, like it just felt more and more worth it to try to keep going than to go back. So yeah, baby steps for
So
sure.
what kept you going?
Mm. Well, one of the things that actually, even before I started the 4 days, and this continues to keep me going, but my therapist, said something to me, a couple days, maybe weeks before I even considered the 2 days, 4 days thing. And, she said to me that, you've done a masterful job at surviving. And I think that's truly when I think about the ways that people engage with alcohol, it is a tool. It's not the most helpful tool and it causes harm, but it's how I knew how to survive. It's how I survived my whole life. And so she's like, you've done a masterful job at surviving, and alcohol has been your main tool. And then she said, would you like a new set of tools? And it was like this light bulb moment where I was like, oh, maybe there are other ways to do this. It was less of you need to stop X and more of like, do you want an invitation into more? Do you want expansiveness? Do you want to embrace new things and new opportunities? And that was way more intriguing to me than just somebody saying like you need to stop drinking, because that wouldn't have worked anyway.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. So what were those tools?
Yeah, so many things with the tools. I did, get involved in a sober community, which I'm still part of now. So community, virtually, in person, surrounding myself with other people who are going through the same thing. And also, I didn't necessarily like, I know some people for their own circumstances kind of have to, create an entire new group of friends, especially people who are not drinking. But it was also relating to my friends who still drink and just relating to them differently. Like I didn't feel this need to be like, if you drink, I can't handle that. And so the community piece was huge. A lot of Quit Lit, a lot of podcasts like this where people talk about their experience, other forms of therapy like EMDR, to process trauma. And also, what once led me to feel like I needed to drink in the first place now has become this very healing thing which we were able to take the things that were, healing and modalities for me and just switch the way that we thought about them. So, for example, uh, even when I got done playing basketball, I was incredibly competitive. I still played pickup basketball like maybe 5, 6, 7 times a week. But the goal of that was to try to win. The goal of that was to try to get validation from other people. And the goal of that was to perform well. And so my therapist again, she was just like, well, like, what if we just completely changed the way we look at basketball or working out, like as it was this like punishment thing or this thing I had to evaluate, like did I do good or did I do bad? And we just took it, and she's like, well, what if we change the way you evaluate when you go play basketball? Instead of like, did you score this points, did you win? It's more about like, how much fun did you have? Which was kind of like I'm like, what fun? I mean, basketball is fun, but you're supposed to win. So that was a little bit of a shift, and also just recognizing that I was there to, allow my body to release stress, and not make it so much about me. I really had to get outside of myself and not care about the wins or losses. And working out and exercise, fitness, those things also became in and of itself its own modality, in the sense that if I missed a day or if I didn't go as vigorously as I was used to, I often would be like, well, that doesn't count. And now it's like these things plus adding slower things like yoga or walking on the treadmill. Like that's kind of my cardio now. And I'm just like, it's crazy to think about that, because it used to be like if you weren't drenched in sweat and you weren't like incredibly sore the next day, then what are we even doing here? But like a softer approach to movement was a huge one. And then, just starting to really allow myself to dream again. I think what alcohol stole from me in a lot of ways was an optimism and a hopefulness towards life and what is possible. And so a lot of that was rediscovering gifts, talents, and actually putting those things out there in a way that I could actually change, from just having a job to actually pursuing things that I enjoy doing and that actually can make a difference in other people's lives.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I think you touched on external validation, and for me, that is a key thing that keeps a lot of people stuck, and a lot of people drinking as well, because
Yeah.
they want to keep up, they want to fit in with their friendship groups, they want to be seen as a normal adult, they don't want to have any stigma or labels put on them if they say they're not going to drink. They don't, there's lots there, isn't there, in terms of external validation. I did a masterclass a while ago, and people can listen to it on the podcast, so I think I put it on the podcast. But it's such a key thing that keeps people stuck.
Yeah.
And so how did you go from that external validation to actually being comfortable in your own skin?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it takes time, it was definitely when I first, those first, 100 whatever days, like I felt like a fish out of water. I felt like, awkward in my skin, and even like telling people that I had stopped drinking, because a lot of the time the response I would get is like, "Oh, but you didn't really have a problem." And so then you feel like you almost have to explain how bad it was, but then it's also like you don't really want to tell everybody how bad it was. But I think it was a mix of like cautiously and intentionally understanding that some things were going to look different. I think what often is missing when people get sober is the grief. Like I think we get sober and we think everything's just going to stay the same and nothing's going to change and people are going to, just understand or just get it. And a lot of, people did, and a lot of people were supportive, and a lot of people were like, I don't get it. And there was a lot of grieving of the former way that I used to live that I was able to do and do with my therapist. But also, like, I didn't necessarily have this complete 180 in terms of what my life looked like. Sports is a big part of my life and my daily. And talk about fall. It's also football season. I love football, American football for those listening over there. But it was hard at first to be able to walk into a sports bar because all the associations were there sitting there. and drinking and watching the games and, being in that crowd. Or I lived in a very big sports town for college football, so the tailgating and things like that. So at first it was a little intimidating to go back into that same environment. And what I realized is that what really helped was the addition of non-alcoholic beverages, and, just realizing that, you can still be a part of these things and just choose not to drink. You can still have a beverage. We don't have to just drink soda and juice anymore as, mocktails. But I think the other thing that was really helpful was, um, just telling people up front and just telling people early on. There's one day I went out with a bunch of the guys I played basketball with, and we sat down and we were gonna go watch a football game on a Sunday afternoon. And I said, "Hey guys, I'm not drinking. I'm just gonna drink NA beer." And they kind of were like, "Okay." It wasn't, I think a lot of times people feel intimidated or scared about the questions that they're going to get, especially in social situations. And so kind of putting myself out there in first and not necessarily having to deal with the questioning was helpful for me. But it takes a lot of time. And also, like I said, some things that I used to do when I drink, I just don't do anymore. And
Mhm.
so allowing myself to be okay with that over a period of time.
Yeah, yeah, amazing, amazing. And then you talked about movement, and it's one of the
Mhm.
key tools, I think. Movement
Yeah.
is really good when you stop drinking. I say people should move at least 20 to 30 minutes a day if they
Yeah.
can. And you talked about the slow movement approach, which I really loved. Tell me a bit about how you transition from that whole, I need to swear, I need to be showing that I
Yeah.
need to prove that I'm really working hard,
Yeah.
to actually embracing things like yoga. For me, yoga's been a key part of my
Yeah.
journey. And I discovered yoga, I stopped in November 2020, so it's nearly 5 years. And I discovered yoga in the January. I did a 30-day program, and I've literally, give or take maybe a few days, but
For
every
sure.
day I have practiced yoga. And that's been my thing of breathing, just sitting wherever I am in whatever emotions I'm in on that day, and stretching my body and moving my body. And actually,
Mhm.
there's some hard yogas as well. So it's not all
Right.
easy, lots of planks. But again, I think it's really interesting how people have a perspective that you need to be really going hard all the time in order to show that you're exercising and you're moving. So share a bit more about that. I think it'd be fascinating to hear from a.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because, yeah, I mean, I used to be very, very rigid, and, I got to work out this many times a week. And if I don't, like I said, there was like almost like this punitive sense of like, if you're not going hard, then it doesn't matter. And I have to give a lot of credit. I don't know if you've heard of her or read any of her work, but Trisha Hersey and her whole rest is resistance movement. Okay, so she shout out to Trisha Hersey, but I heard about, her in a podcast, and I read a couple of her books. She has a book called Rest is Resistance, and she talked about, particularly for those of us who, are people of color, because of, and she's, writing from it from obviously an American perspective, but I know that, capitalism has a stranglehold on the globe. And, we have, because of capitalism and things like that, we have equated what we produce with our worth. And so she completely kind of, flips the script and says, because of the lineage of slavery and what our ancestors had to go through, for them to take a nap would have been such a revolutionary thing. For them to rest their bodies, their actual bodies were these, commodities of production. And so she just talks about how in this, hustle and bustle culture, that actually to slow down is to allow yourself clarity. It's allow yourself to access to a dream space. It's allow yourself the ability to actually make decisions, because when you're exhausted and you're tired, and we know this as people who drink, like you're in the cycle of, passing out, waking up, being exhausted, doing it again and again and again, that you really find yourself unable to make the best decisions for yourself. And so I kind of took that philosophy as much as I understood it, and also applied it to movement, and realizing that we get lost in the, the going of moving at a certain pace or lifting hard or whatever it is. And it's not to say there isn't a place for that, but it's in those quiet moments, whether it's yoga, stretching, or doing something slow, that I was able to actually check in with myself. And when I realized that this movement is not about production and it's not about my worth, then it allowed me to kind of cultivate a space of almost meditation within the movement and the exercise itself. And so I had never really experienced that because, growing up as a training athlete, like there's really not a lot of time or space for that. And so it allowed me to kind of reclaim that sense of joy within movement that I felt like I had lost, from being so focused on, getting to the next level for all the years that I was playing basketball.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I think it's a real shift, isn't it? It's a shift in mindset, and so many, as we touched on earlier, so many people think that it's what they do that gives them value. It's what they do that makes them feel worthy,
Right.
like they deserve it. And it's completely the opposite. Ultimately, it's who you are. It's the be do have model. It's the who am I,
Yeah.
which then leads to, well, what do I do in order to have what I want to have, versus if I have this and I do that, then I'm going to be this. And it's a very different model. So really thinking about who am I, and allowing yourself to be anyone you want to be, right? Because you don't have to be the person you were yesterday. You can change,
Right.
and you can give yourself permission to do something different. And I really admire the fact that you did that. You effectively said, okay, I'm going to try something a bit different, and I'm going to go with it. And it's obviously changed your whole
Yeah.
perception, because
Yeah.
stopping and breathing and thinking and meditating scares a lot of people. People don't want to be in their own heads. They don't
Right.
want to really think about what's causing these feelings. And they sometimes feel that the feelings are actually theirs, who they are. The feelings aren't who they are. They're just thoughts. They're
Right.
just their messages really telling you what's
Yep.
going on. But you don't want to sit in that. And actually, you only need to sit in it for like a minute, and
Yep.
it starts to dissipate. But even
Yep.
sitting in it for a minute is hard, and that's the joy of things like yoga and breath work and meditation and everything else. And so I think, having discovered that, and I imagine you're a very different person to the one you were prior to drinking.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, very, very much so. Like, yeah, the idea of sleeping in until noon, or the idea of, not choosing not to work out. Like it was like before, when I was drinking and kind of in that, like you said, that productivity mindset, I would miss workouts and I'd feel bad about missing workouts, where now I can choose not to work out because I'm listening to what my body has to say. And choosing slowness, choosing rest, like really allowing myself to do that is something that was so foreign to me prior to. And it's because I think I was trying to constantly, validate and hustle for my worth. And like you said, that kind of that flipping of that model of like finding that inner sense of, confidence and trust and worthiness, internally, completely allows you to just show up differently and, make decisions from that space. And yeah, it's a much slower life. All the things that I thought that I wanted, back then, and even when I was younger, I think it's Laura McCowan who says like a simple little life, like that's what wins. It's like just having, this kind of peace of mind and this, sense of self-trust that a lot of us did not have when we were drinking, can really change, every day. And it certainly has for me.
Amazing, amazing. And the other thing I wanted to touch on that you mentioned was dreaming again. And I always
Yeah.
say you literally dream again. I mean, your sleep is better, so you get that REM deep sleep, which
Yes.
is what gives you the dreams, right? But so you, as well as dreaming again, you literally
Right.
dream again. And so, what dreams came up for you?
Yeah.
And you're obviously now in a completely different career.
Yeah.
So I imagine that was part of the dream, but tell me a bit about how you discovered that you're actually dreaming again, and what happened next.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, I think that, even though I necessarily wouldn't have said it this way, but I can look back and see, I think I had, not necessarily a negative view of the world. I just didn't really think, I didn't have a ton of hope infused into my life. I kind of got, after school, kind of got into the grind of working, and, this is what you do. You just work until you're 65, and then maybe you can retire. And, it's like kind of like, we often hear about how hard things are, and people are like, it's just hard, just how it is. Marriage is hard, relationships hard, like everything is hard. And I think I kind of internalized that, especially when I had to, pivot away from coaching and feel like, see, this is just another thing that's just going to be hard that I just have to suck it up and get through. And so there wasn't a lot of risk, and there wasn't a lot of like thinking like, oh, I could go do this. I felt very confined that I just need to make as much money as I can to pay the things I need to pay. And that was like the extent of my life. And I get to drink on the side, and I get to go play basketball on the side. That really was like what my life looked like. And so when I got, sober, one of the things that I knew I always loved, but I didn't really know like what it could mean or how it would even come to fruition. But I started sharing my story just in small sober circles with friends, and telling other people in my life just about it, and discovered I really enjoy speaking and being able to, put language to things. And so that then became thinking about like, oh, like, what would that look like? Also, I love coaching. I know that. I love working with people, but I knew I wasn't going to go back into the fray of college, sports. So, one of the things that happened is, started my own podcast, which I never would have thought. And, it's definitely been a wild ride. I have it with Chris Marshall, and we do the Clean Play podcast. It's all about the intersection of sports and sobriety. But the way that came about is we just push play. And so it's like kind of been this mantra now for both of us. Like, you know, I thought we were meeting one random day to talk about planning the podcast, because I'm a planner. I'm a type 6 on the Enneagram. Like, I want to get all my ducks in a row. He's like, no, let's just do it. And I was like, but I don't know how to do it. He's like, yeah, it's okay. We'll figure it out. And from there, we're in the midst of season 2 now. But that, and just kind of jumping off the cliff and realizing like somehow we'll land, started then to start me thinking about like, how could I use my talents and my gifts in a way that's not just working at a desk every day. And so then, through Euphoric AF and Carolina was able to, get the scholarship to be in her, coaching certification program. Again, something I never would have thought in my life I'd be an entrepreneur. Definitely not. And so it was just kind of like, like a snowball effect of like, okay, we started the podcast, enjoying that. Okay, got into this program and started to really, and a lot of the material that we covered and books that we read kind of reinstilled the sense of hope and possibility that I just didn't really see before. And so then obviously that led me to starting my business, having my own coaching, business, and working with clients, and, being able to be part of, projects and shows like yours, and just, putting myself out there, which I, still struggle with. It's not easy, especially on the social media side, but there is a willingness now to do these things because I know it's something that I enjoy, and it's also something that I want to meet people's needs and be able to serve them in any way that I can. And so yeah, a lot has changed since that day one over 1,000 days ago.
That is incredible. And well done you for putting yourself out there and saying, I'm going to serve, I'm going to do something different, I'm going to share what I know, and I'm going to become a coach. I mean, it's such an amazing thing to do. So you touched on the fact that you'd lost hope basically, and you just weren't dreaming, you weren't hopeful, you didn't really see, you just thought everything was hard. So if someone's listening at the moment and in that position where they've lost hope, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that I would say, yeah, it's hard because it's definitely a hard place to be. But kind of like we talked about earlier, like it's baby steps. Like I did not realize that calling a office to schedule one appointment for therapy would set me on a trajectory to where I'm at now. I think inviting in help in whatever form that looks like can really be a good first step. and getting the right people around you to support you as you take these small steps forward.
Mm. Yeah, and I agree. I think it is one step at a time, and just not putting too much pressure on yourself. Um, and then the other thing that I loved you said about your podcast, and so everyone should go and listen to your podcast, Clean Play podcast. But it is very much about just do it messy, just get on with it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and that takes a lot of. Oh, I did a similar thing with my podcast. Very
Yeah.
much a similar thing. I was just like, right, do it messy. Someone said that to me, and I was like, I get it. Right, I'm going to just go for it. But it is that leap, and the net will appear
Yeah.
thing, isn't it? And then
Yeah.
you don't know. And I do think a lot of people I've spoken to on the podcast who have shared their stories, and as I said, listeners can go back and listen to some of them. But so many people have the same story where they've leapt and actually a new opportunity's come or something else has come. Were you that brave before you stopped drinking?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think in some ways I would say yes, but I don't think that was the tenor of my life. Like I think there was moments, there's pockets, right? Sparks of motivation or courage. And I also have Carolina's one of the things that she says is eat fear for breakfast. I have that up on my wall in my office. And so just recognizing that, fear is always going to be there. It's not going to change whether you do it or you don't. The only thing that might change is you might not do it. And so fear can't be the only thing that's keeping me from that. But no, I would certainly say, I mean, there's so many other examples. I'm sure we could talk for hours, but part of my story is I, discovered that I was queer in sobriety because I was finally able to take away all of the labels I was supposed to be in society. And so then, I took a huge leap in, pursuing a relationship with a woman for the first time, and we've been together for almost 2 years now. And so it's just like it's like those leaps become they it's kind of like lifting weights, I would say. There's never been a time that I've lifted weights where I've gone in and been like, oh, this is going to be so easy and breezy. I know it's going to be hard, it's going to require a lot. But you don't necessarily it doesn't necessarily get easier, but you get stronger, right? So it's like the weights, it start with a 5 that used to be really heavy, now I'm up to whatever 35, still heavy. I just can pick it up a little bit easier. And I feel like that's what bravery encourages. It's like you just keep doing it, and then it never becomes easy, but you become more equipped to be able to do it.
Amazing advice. And so tell me a bit about your empowerment coaching, your alcohol-free empowerment coaching. Who
Yeah.
do you
So I
help? What
mean,
do you do?
yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely, I got a lot of inspiration from the work I do with Chris Marshall on the Clean Play podcast because, sports for me is always going to be a part of how I relate to people. When I got sober, I told and shared, about my experiences through the language and lens of sports. It's just what I know, and I understand the parallels there, and just realizing how much there is to talk about between the sobriety world and sports world, how those two things can coexist, and they really do. And so, a big part of who I work with is, not necessarily just athletes, but people who understand, or people who have some sort of affinity for the athletic mindset. Like we can all understand the greatness of athletes and the pursuit of wanting to be, their best self. But I really, work with people who kind of like I found myself in, are in a place in life where their identity is shifting or something is different, whether that's they're walking away from sports, walking away from a career, walking away from a relationship. It could be multiple things. And really kind of getting to the heart of the identity piece, and then helping them kind of restructure that. And where it makes sense with certain clients where they're really inclined to sports, like we can use, certain athletes, sports stories, things like that to really kind of drive home the points. But that's kind of at the core of it, is really using sports and the language of it as a vehicle to help people through transitions and kind of rediscover who they are.
Amazing. So how can people get in touch with you, Anne?
Yeah, so I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes, but if you go over to my website, cleanplaycoaching.com, I have a free scouting report, which is kind of like a, clarity call, discovery call, if you will. But, as a coach, I just had to put that in there. You scout the offense, the defense, what the other team is doing, and you kind of come up with a little playbook. And so that's kind of that to kind of see. if it's a good fit, to work with me. And then also I'm on Instagram at Clean Play Coaching. You can find me and Chris at the Clean Play podcast, wherever you get your shows. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for sharing so much and such wisdom as well. I always end the podcast with my favorite question. What does
Yeah.
thriving alcohol free mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I love the thrive part because I think, alcohol free, like I said earlier, like we have acknowledged, it's not easy. It's not something that is like the easiest process, but there is an ability, at least for me, I can speak from my experience, that in order to thrive, I had to become alcohol free. And I think what at the heart of thriving alcohol free for me is kind of like my therapist said, like it is understanding that why by putting down the drink, you're offering yourself more. It's an invitation to more expansiveness, opportunity, hopefulness, joy, and possibility that I just wasn't able to tap into or see when I was drinking. So for me, that's what it means to thrive alcohol free.
Amazing. Amazing. It's giving yourself space, isn't it? I love that.
Mhm.
Open yourself up to possibilities, opportunities, joy. Just wonderful words. Well, thank you. Any last bit of wisdom that you want to share with the listener?
Any last bit of wisdom? I mean, yeah, I think, one thing that I will say that I think doesn't necessarily get talked about enough, I think in a lot of ways we talk about the difficult stories and the memoirs of sobriety. And in my mind, sobriety is not an event, it's a lifestyle. And so the act of getting sober is not this one-time thing that you do, but it's about building a lifestyle that sustains and maintains all the things we're talking about in terms of thriving alcohol free. And so I think the more you can create and curate a lifestyle, which you do not need to escape from, is going to just, buffer and buffet what it means for you to have an alcohol free life. It's not just this one thing you do. You don't just stop drinking. That might be the entryway for most of us, but there's so much more beyond that.
Absolutely agree. Thank you so much.
Thank
Really love
you.
that. I really love speaking to you. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks for being
Absolutely.
on the
Thank you.
podcast.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Anne. What a wonderful conversation. And I hope you found it helpful. And if you were challenged by any of it, if you were thinking about how do I really start to deal with my emotions, how do I get rid of that external validation, or even how do I just get started on this journey of maybe ditching drinking for a period of time to see how it feels and where it goes, feel free to get in touch. And I'd love to connect with you over a virtual coffee. So if that sounds good, I'll put the link below and you can sign up to a virtual coffee at a time that suits you. And I'll be happy to talk through, see where you are, talk through any challenges you have, and then maybe help you come up with a plan in terms of what your next steps could be. So I'd love to connect. Feel free to get in touch. And with that, thank you again for listening, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Take care. Thank you so much for listening to the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe so you get alerted every time I drop a new episode. I'd love it if you could rate, review, and share this episode. Feel free to tag me on Instagram at Thrive Alcohol Free and follow me for daily tips. If you would like to work with me, I offer one-to-one coaching sessions and have a group coaching program. If you're not yet ready for coaching, I also have a self-paced online course, which is a companion to my book, A Cocktail of Clarity. I will see you in the next episode. Have a wonderful week. Take care.